I hope you can see my screen now. Yeah, today I'll be presenting or providing ideas around what an equitable transition can look like in the face of polluter and cyber elites. Um, um, I don't think I have many answers. A lot of what I have are more ideas and questions, but I hope that sparks some sort of discussion. Um, And so, yeah, I guess I'll begin. Um, so I'm going to be talking a little bit more broadly beyond polluter, elites, and AI, just trying to put it all into context. Um, and so when we talk about climate action today, we hear a lot about the concept of a just transition, the idea that we need to move away from fossil fuels and to have a process that is fair, that protects workers, communities, livelihoods that are dependent on the fossil fuel industry, that ensures that negative impacts of, say, mitigation and adaptation are managed, such as finance to compensate for the cost of transitioning, or ensuring that human rights are maintained in renewable energy developments or upstream critical mineral supply chains, and that the process of a just transition is inclusive with participation from communities, um, not just participation, but also led by communities with the space to self-determine what happens on their lands. So while just transition is a very important concept, it can be limiting at times because fairness during a transition isn't the same as just transforming the system itself. And that's kind of what Simon was talking about, that we need to think about the system. If we change our energy sources without changing the structures of power, wealth, and inequality that drive like exploitation, this isn't transforming. We're just kind of rebranding. We're replicating the same system of systems of inequality that led to this climate crisis in the first place. And so here I want to really go beyond just transition and explore what an actual equitable climate transformation could look like. And so kind of, going back to some of the basics is that climate change is a systemic issue. It's often described as an environmental or technological problem, a challenge of reducing emissions or fixing our energy systems, but it's actually a problem of systems, including economic, political, and social, as was described by the previous presenters. Small fraction of humanity or the polluter elite drives the majority of emissions, and this group consists of multinational corporations, wealthy governments, and elites who extract fossil fuels and and in the end, they also have significant influence over climate policies. As Astrid mentioned in her talk, the wealthiest or richest 10% of people are responsible for more than half of carbon pollution, while the poorest half contribute less than 10%. And so when we think about climate policies, we're spending enormous amounts of money and time to mitigate the emissions of a small fraction of the population. And so this isn't just about carbon, it's about power, it's about the concentration of power and wealth who creates these structural injustices. And so just kind of also building on that, much of climate policy has this type of carbon tunnel vision where we focus on emissions rather than looking at the bigger picture, looking at land and who, when we talk about carbon offsets, who owns the land where offsets are created, whose water is used for lithium extraction for electric vehicles or hydrogen production, who decides what counts as sustainable. And so like when we have this narrow focus on carbon, we can reproduce these injustices when we don't look beyond, when we have this kind of tunnel vision. And so also building on that, emissions is just one, carbon emissions is just one planetary boundary. There are many other planetary boundaries like water, like pollution and things like that that are also at risk. And so we also risk missing out on addressing those other really important environmental issues by solely focusing on carbon emissions. And so when we talk about what has, led to these problems, we have to look globally. Our world is built on unequal exchange, where we have an international system that really transfers wealth and resources from the global south to the north. In this diagram to the right, a paper by Doringer et al., they look at, how much of the high income countries, which is in purple, how much of their resources are coming from the global south, and it's almost half. And this type of resource extraction and labor exploitation occurs within this global economy, and it's going to continue if renewable energy and this energy transition requires a lot of materials. Cobalt, lithium, nickel, they're mined in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, often under dangerous and exploitative conditions. So we have to be mindful of that. Meanwhile, trade rules and financial systems continue to favor, multinational corporations headquartered in wealthy nations. And this is a modern continuation of colonial patterns. It's called climate colonialism, where we continue to where a lot of the solutions are implemented in the global north, and the global south who are most responsible don't often get all the benefits and will be the most affected by climate change. I did also want to talk about climate finance, because climate finance is, in order to have this transition, enormous amounts of climate finance is needed, but our climate finance structures have not matched the need. There's a target of spending 100 billion per year within the global south. They're having this transfer of funds from the global north to the south, but that target has never been met. There's also legacies of colonialism in climate finance system, in terms of the loans that create dependence on the global north, emphasis on market-based systems, market-based instruments, the need to speak the language of the colonizers when trying to obtain finance, challenging reporting and accreditation requirements. And so all of these challenges are structural inequities that are built into our climate finance architecture. And so when we're talking about a transition that's both in the global north and south, we have to talk about finances and how that transition is going to happen. I did want to make a point also about the polluter elite and cyber elite, since that is a big focus of the conference, but they are part of this system. I know there was a speaker that said, let's Jeff Bezos, yes, he is doing a lot of great things in terms of the climate movement, but then singling out a single billionaire doesn't talk about the systems that enable these billionaires to exist and this large amount of inequality to exist in the first place. We have polluter elites that continue to profit from fossil fuels. And now we have this new layer of inequality emerging with the rise of these cyber elites, these tech giants and billionaires who dominate this, even this green tech economy, we can call it. These are not just shaping how we're using data, but how data, resources, and even our personal behaviors are monetized. And while Google, Amazon, and Tesla are making massive investments in renewable energy, electric vehicles, and AI, they have disproportionate control over many aspects of our lives, of information, of resources, and labor. And so the tech industry's role in the transition is often presented as a solution, but who owns the data and the technologies that drive this change? And so, there are some ways to, some ideas that I put forward into how to transition to an equitable transformation based on, a lot of the literature out there. And it's really, some components include the way our governance systems are designed, redesigning our economic systems, our education, and the knowledge systems, including how we do research and produce knowledge, and then just greater solidarity. So just to go through these a bit, the climate crisis is not just a carbon problem, but as I mentioned, it's a systems problem. And so, when we're looking at governance, we need to ensure that decisions embed these types of justice principles in climate decision making, not just looking at emissions reductions, but looking at justice as a whole. It means like moving from centralized control of power to more democratic participation, with communities having ownership over their energy, food, resources, and because right now a lot of those decisions are made by people in power who often don't have that local community in mind, and so it's really about redistributing power from elite, and ensuring that the wealth and technologies of this sustainable economy are shared more equitably, that their systems of data control, reduce labor exploitation, changes to our economic and trade systems, and how resources are extracted and produced. And so, we need to reform the trade system and finance systems. Like, these really drive which technologies are invested in, whether it's fossil fuels, renewables, energy efficiency, or something else. And that is not a simple thing to change. We need to ensure that these systems have sustainability and fairness built into it. And another idea is and a lot of alternative economic paradigms like degrowth, donut economics, the well-being economy, are trying to are focusing on alternative metrics other than GDP as how we define prosperity in our economy. And I just wanted to leave on a note around education and education systems, because as scientists, the knowledge systems that we use in our science are often really driven by the global north and the existing Western and Eurocentric knowledge systems. And as part of this ecological transition, indigenous knowledge is often not treated as as scientific, where it very much is. And so having a knowledge ecosystem that is inclusive, that isn't just participatory, but where there's co-production happening, it's very important if we're going to shift how we it's an education system is another important system that needs to be changed, including our political and economic and governance system. And finally, the way, given the political climate and how things are moving, just maintaining solidarity. We're more connected than we're not. Connecting these various movements, economic, racial, gender, economic justice, is important because it's often the same problems coming that are leading to different symptoms, but it's at its core it's often from the same thing. So we're much more similar than we are different, and I think recognizing that is important. That's all I have for today. I
Emily,
hope
that's a lot. That's a lot, and that's wonderful.